Like there's someone with huge amounts of potential, but they can't execute it. Well, that is very similar to our body. So instead, just like we would do in that situation, if it was another person, how can I resource you? How can I support you? What can we do to help you get to your full potential? We have to think like that with our body as well. How can I eliminate a burden? How can I reduce a stressor? How can I change your inflammation? How can I work on your gut? How can I support your liver to then be able to allow you to fundamentally access your full potential?
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast.
All right, everyone, welcome back to today's episode. We're already giggling, so it's clearly going to be a good one. Today, I have Dr. Samantha and Dr. Alyssa from our Brooklyn location, and we are going to be talking about a topic that you guys all love to ask questions about, which is weight loss resistance. And everyone takes a slightly different approach when it comes to weight loss resistance. The core physiology is the same. Everyone takes the same courses here. We all understand the difference between caloric weight loss and hormonal weight loss, and that's something we're going to get into today. But before we do, I think both of you have a story that really makes you think about weight loss resistance differently. So I would love to start there. So Sam, why don't you give us a rundown about your background and why you love treating insulin resistance?
Yeah, absolutely. So in general, I do a focus of metabolic and hormonal health, in particular with perimenopause, menopause, PCOS, and then resistant weight loss. In the context of resistant weight loss, or rather even just body composition as well, I've had experience working with people one-on-one, and then also just through kind of educational modules as well. When it comes to what also draws me to want to help people with resistant weight loss is that I used to do bodybuilding competitions myself. And while I still love lifting, I have steered away from competing largely because there are definitely some very unhealthy aspects to that sport that I don't align with anymore. But I absolutely value all the learning that came from those competitions. And I made so many mistakes along the way, which now helps me a lot in the context of supporting others with their weight loss journeys and body composition.
Yeah. And I always say whenever anyone is competing, what you have to do to get your body in that way, because there's growth hormones and there's loss hormones, right? Or like signals. And so it is a very interesting balance to gain a lot of muscle and definition while also losing fat and being incredibly lean. And when you learn how to modify physiology to that degree, it inevitably helps you to understand when things go wrong, right? How to modify and what could be going wrong. And so it's funny because I've worked with a number of people who have body comp and like competition backgrounds. And not only is it the discipline and all those types of things that can be beneficial, but it's also with the most love and respect. It's not natural. You know what I mean? Like you need to really work at that. And there's a lot of things that we do that aren't natural, but when that comes into play, I always say the amount of learning that comes with it is so helpful. So even like when I first started my practice, yes, I had the background in obesity and immunology, but I didn't have the opportunity to see thousands of patients over the course of a short period of time. When I get to monitor your practices, I get to see that. But what I would do is I would go on the website. I don't know if it still exists, actually, T Nation. And it was a website specifically for like bodybuilders. So T being testosterone. And so it was a lot of male bodybuilders on this site, but how they would talk about supplements and like their supplement stacks and their cutting cycles and their routines and like helping each other troubleshoot how to gain more muscle and lose fat was so helpful to me because they had no effing clue the science behind it, right? Like none at all, but they would know it would work. So then you would see like 1,000 people talk about this same supplement stack and they were like, oh my God, it works so well. And then I would go into their research and pull out why it was doing what they would say it was doing. So it is a very helpful lens to take something sometimes to an extreme to say, okay, well, if you have to do this to get your body to do this and now you're weight loss resistant, how do those principles apply across the board? So yeah, I always find that fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, in the context of bodybuilding, I will just do a little quick caveat. I was not using hormones. Just a quick, I did go natural. But yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely those classic stacks. And that even was something that I really loved to do when I was in, undergrad, looking at the mechanisms behind that and really getting nerdy with that. So
love it. And Alyssa, tell us about your kind of journey into treating weight loss resistance and how you like to think about it.
Okay, so a little different than Sam. I can't necessarily say that I was a bodybuilder ever back in my day. But yeah, honestly, so I think kind of started back when I was in university or I guess high school. I really felt like I didn't really have a lot of guidance on nutrition and kind of like protein content, anything like that. So I just felt like I honestly probably didn't really know what the proper way to eat was. So then from high school, I decided to go into nutrition and I went to Guelph and have an undergrad in like nutrition dietetics and thought that was kind of the like way I wanted to go about like my career and be a dietitian. And then I kind of stumbled across like naturopathic medicine and realized like, oh, there's like so much here that I can do that can encompass like nutrition has a huge role, but also there's so many different modalities that we can use to support patients from a different lens. So that's kind of why I started learning a bit about more nutrition wise and then kind of came into this path. And then, yeah, I guess kind of from my own struggles, I guess, yeah, I never really realized the difference between like resistance training and cardio and just thought like obviously cardio was better. You're just taught like weight comes down to calories in, calories out kind of approach. And then I think it was honestly mostly from like being at this program and kind of afterwards where I really stumbled into like appreciating more like the weight loss resistance side of things. I also feel like that's kind of what I focus a lot in practice, as well as like PCOS, endometriosis, a little bit of thyroid support as well. And just feel like there's so many like interconnecting like pathways they all kind of cross over to. So I think that's kind of the beauty is where you hit two birds with one stone kind of thing. And we realize as we dive deeper into weight loss resistance, which I'm sure we'll talk about a lot today, how these kind of triangles are so interconnected. Yeah. And I just find it can be it's like super interesting area to dive deeper into and just kind of identifying the root cause of where the weight loss resistance piece is from is where I find like that's where I have like my greatest passion, I guess you could say, is it like do we need to work? Obviously nutrition is an aspect, but there's so many different kind of areas of the triangle that I feel like I really like diving deeper with patients. And yeah, when you actually can support them from that way and they actually see the results after having been told like from their previous like medical doctor just to kind of eat better, work out more, and they haven't seen the results, it's kind of nice just for us to be able to be those ones to kind of give them more direction and just, try to support them along that round.
Yeah, so when we talk about the triangles, the girls are drinking the Kool-Aid, that's the conversation around the 5 to 7 causes of disease. And there's really only those components, according to me. And so weight loss resistance is a unique combination of 2 to 3 of those. So when we look at it, it's insulin and blood sugar, which I would argue is always involved. Then we have inflammation and immune dysfunction. We have the gut and liver nutrient deficiencies, cellular energy production, mitochondria, and like cellular rusting, aging. And then we look at the nervous system. And so within those, there are different ways things can present. And so when we're talking about PCOS, when we're talking about endometriosis, when we're talking about hypothyroidism, as much as those things are technically separate conditions, the underpinnings are incredibly similar. And so that's always how we think through that. So let's dive into those pillars in a little bit more detail and just talk about how they apply to a conversation of weight loss resistance. So why don't you take insulin and glucose, Sam? Like, how does that show up with weight loss resistance?
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to insulin resistance, this is a big one that can almost always be a part of someone's weight loss journey and something that we want to be thinking about. So when it comes right down to it, what is insulin? So insulin is something that we need for our bodies or our cells to take in glucose. So we eat something that has glucose, we absorb it, now it's in our bloodstream, and then what happens is we need that insulin signal to then bring the glucose into the cell. When we start to see resistance, what happens is that glucose will bind, but our cells are not responding to insulin to pull it into the cell anymore. And that's when things can start to go awry as far as our weight loss goals. It impacts so many other things, but for now, we'll keep it reined into weight loss. And so once that starts to develop, essentially, when we become insulin resistant, we're going to start to be in more of a fat storage mode as opposed to using fat for energy. And then that's part one of what then can lead to kind of the issue with weight loss. We also are then going to generate essentially a low-grade inflammation in the body as well, which we will get to, but inflammation is also going to be a factor, and oxidative stress is going to be a factor in terms of our weight loss ability. And then from the same perspective, that low-grade inflammation also is putting a bit of a stressor on our body. And then we can start to tap into the cortisol piece of things. So insulin is something that really can impact almost each different root cause of resistant weight loss.
And so then when we're testing insulin, because it's such a critical hormone, because it's affecting total energy, because it's affecting inflammation, it's affecting our gut, it's affecting our stress response, it becomes a really critical thing. So I know we've talked about this test before on here, but there will definitely be new listeners. So Alyssa, could you give us a rundown of how we test insulin and why it's important that we don't just test it fasting?
Yeah. So definitely, that's probably one of my favorite tests around with patients. I always tell them, and if they have a history of ever being pregnant, I let them know. I'm like, so you might have done this test similarly in pregnancy. However, it does kind of vary a little bit in our overall markers. And they always look at me and they think, oh no, not again. But basically what we do is we tell patients to kind of go to the lab fasted, and then they'll get their blood drawn. Then they'll drink this 75-gram sugary drink. And then we'll test their blood at the 30-minute mark, 1 hour, and then 2-hour marks. So this basically lets us know how your body responds to glucose every time you kind of consume it. So over the course of 2 hours, naturally, we should kind of have our peak around that 30-minute mark, and then it should kind of drop to normal levels by the 2 hours. And then what this test also shows us is how much insulin our pancreas is producing in order to compensate for that blood sugar curve. So sometimes we might have blood sugars relatively controlled, and our HbA1c, which is our average 3-month blood glucose, might look or appear to be good on our blood work within the normal limits. But what we often can't see is how much insulin our body's actually producing to keep our blood sugar at that stable marker. And that's kind of how pre-diabetes and then diabetes develops over time, because our body is producing so much insulin to try to keep the blood sugar stable there. And then over time, that just leads to higher and higher HbA1cs. So yeah, the reason why we like to do this test instead of opposed to just doing a morning fasting insulin is because naturally we are always eating. So we're never really kind of in a fasted state often, maybe in the morning when you first wake up, but throughout the day, our body is constantly eating. We're constantly pumping out insulin, and glucose is going into the cells. So that's why we kind of like to see where things are at by doing this test, because it shows us, it mimics what our body's doing in real time every time we're kind of consuming some of those carbohydrate meals. And if we're already kind of in the morning peaking and at our fasting, our insulin's already high, we know that our body is already struggling and it's in more of that fat storage mode as opposed to being able to burn that fat as efficiently as fuel sources throughout the day.
And we look at fasting, and to your point, the average glucose over 3 months, our HbA1c, we look at that as just the very basics of diagnosis. It doesn't tell us about the 10 years that you feel like crap, but you don't yet have a diagnosis. And I always say that's the big thing when we're working in the world of weight loss. there is no blood test technically that is like, okay, you are now diagnosed as someone who's going to struggle with weight loss. But insulin can be that if it was done more frequently. We can be that metric to say, here's your risks, here's what this could look like in 5 years, 10 years, etc. And so I do think it's so understanding what happens after you eat is so underutilized and such a key part of it. So then when we get into the other pillars and the other components, one of the big ones is not just insulin, but the gut and liver. So why don't we get into how that plays into insulin resistance?
So, yeah, when it comes to gut health and liver health, these are two huge players. For one thing, most of the time, I'm always like not trying to say, but it comes down to a lot of things do come down to our microbiome, right? So, if we have a healthy, diverse, and robust microbiome, we are also supporting our metabolic factors internally, including insulin. So, things that we want to think about in the context, again, always thinking about drawing back to insulin resistance. But if we do have insulin resistance, there tends to be a different pattern in our microbiome that can show up. For example, there tends to be kind of a higher level of bacteria that have something called LPS on there. And then when that happens and those bacteria are present, that is something that can contribute to leaky gut. And then when we have leaky gut, that is something that can then lead to inflammation in the body and then just kind of further exacerbating and kind of pulling us away from where we want to go. And so that's kind of one player that we're thinking about. The other thing that we want to think about too is, okay, so there's microbes that can negatively impact our ability to lose weight. But then there's also the good ones that can really help us metabolically. So without trying to embarrass myself with Latin, there are good ones. And one that I'm relatively comfortable to say is Akkermansia. That is one thing that is quite well researched and a pretty hot topic on social media, depending on your algorithm. So there are absolutely other specific microbes that have been studied in the context of weight loss and improving our insulin resistance, for example, and that would be Akkermansia as an example. Now, it's not just going to come down to, okay, I'm going to take this probiotic and then the gut's going to be better, right? What we really need is that diverse profile. So that's why we have to also be thinking about the gut. We have to be thinking about what food is going into our gut because that is directly impacting what happens to our microbiome. And then, just the same way that all these causes are impacting one another, right? Our bodies aren't operating in discrete systems, right? They're always talking. So stress is another player that impacts our microbiome as well. Our external environment also playing a role. So, there's kind of lots of things to think about here, but really, even at its basic level, our gut health is the gatekeeper to us absorbing the nutrients that we need for our cells to fire and our metabolism to run the way that it should.
Yeah, and I want to comment on that because I haven't talked about that too much on the podcast, actually. So it's a good reminder. When we're looking at the research on specific nutrients or specific microbes, right? So the types of bugs that are in our gut, when we're talking about Akkermansia or Faecalibacterium prausnitzii or like these different very specific bugs, we have to ask, and like this is where RCTs really miss, but we have to ask, is the type of person who has more of those bugs also eating more diverse fibers, also getting their 25 to 30 grams of fibers, right? Also has adequate blood flow. They're not constipated. They're not eating foods that are inflammatory to the system, right? So you're 100% correct that it's less about saying this bug is associated, because as much as it is, but what does someone need to do to have those keystone species? So these are species that need to be there to keep an anti-inflammatory gut. These are species that have been shown to be associated with reduction in autoimmunity, supporting metabolic health, supporting overall inflammation, hormonal health. How does someone need to operate to have those bugs? Not can I go take a supplement with those bugs in them? And we forget that as consumers, right? You're like, oh, well, this person came on and said more Akkermansia equals less weight loss. I can absolutely put a pill of bugs in my mouth and I hope to lose 10 to 15 pounds. Not necessarily, because the way someone is operating to have those bugs, that bug is now just a representation of health, right? It's a representation of that person's overall system and their health, not that it is the cause of the health itself. So I just wanted to break that down because I do think it's a really good point, especially in marketing and all these things today. We're looking at so many of these supplements and everyone's like, this is God's gift to women. And I'm like, or is the person who they were studying someone who is acting and living in a specific way to get that result? And I think really like the only caveat to that I've seen is creatine, because it's really hard to get enough creatine through food and the supplements do tend to make a big difference. But so many of the other supplements right now that people are touting as like the absolute best thing, you must be on it. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know that I agree with that. So it is just a really important thing. And everyone keeps laughing that they want to like put me on a stand and just like pepper me with like random trends and supplements. And maybe we will do that podcast. We'll see if we can trip Sarah up podcast. But it is really important that we understand the context, not just the intervention, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, in general, regardless of weight loss or anything, there's no magic pill.
I don't know.
No matter
Ozempic's
what.
pretty close.
I mean, sarcopenia.
For anyone who doesn't know what that word is, sarcopenia is when someone is losing muscle precipitously, which we did talk about a little bit on the podcast with Michaela on Ozempic, because that is one of the things we're seeing right now is people, yes, they're losing weight, but they're losing muscle, they're losing tone, they're losing collagen. And so as much as quote unquote, it is a magic pill in that you will get to a certain dosage and something will change on the scale, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be less resistant to weight loss in the future. You could be more resistant to weight loss in the future because you're actually losing your metabolic health. And so that's a whole nother conversation, but an important one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started.
So then when it comes to how we are kind of understanding the role of the nervous system in weight loss resistance, Alyssa, why don't you tackle that one?
Yeah, when we look at weight loss resistance, we definitely want to look at how somebody kind of overall responds to stress, as well as just, like how stressed are they to begin with. So cortisol, I feel like, is also one of those buzzwords you kind of hear all over about, like, is it this? Like, what's going on in terms of cortisol? Cortisol is our known stress hormone. So basically what can happen with cortisol and why it can be related to a weight loss resistance is due to the fact that sometimes when we're stressed, we don't necessarily realize, but a lot of my patients I see in practice, they always say they stress eat. So that can look like consciously or unconsciously, in order to feel kind of better, they're tending to grab their favorite things because naturally it makes them feel a little bit better. So in those stressful situations, when your cortisol is rising, you just tend to choose some of those foods that help you feel a little bit better. As well as cortisol has a role on the liver as well, and it produces more glucose, and that glucose automatically gets turned into fat as well. So if we're in traffic and we're stressed and someone cut us off, or just in general, or our nervous system is in fight or flight mode, we're super anxious, that is also a process where our body is just turning that glucose into fat storage as well. So elevated cortisol affects our sleep. It can affect so many other different pathways, which also can affect our glucose in the morning, our insulin. Yeah, cortisol has a lot of different pathways that it can kind of affect.
Yeah, and one of the things that I always stress and say is so important is we just need to sometimes ground ourselves in the difference between, we call it an environmental mismatch, how we are made to live and how we do live. And when it comes to stress, like there's the stress eating piece. There's the getting reward from food because you don't get it from anything else in your life. So you eat those high fat, high sugar foods. It lights up your brain, gives you a sense of reward and motivation. And you're like, yes. But then there's also the component that we are not meant to be running from a bear 24/7. And depending on the person, some people are more genetically tend towards storage and protection than others. And I always say, we all have that skinny bee friend who gets stressed out and loses 10 pounds while eating McDonald's. She's not me. But in that situation, the research shows that person has a tendency towards acute spikes of norepinephrine and epinephrine. And so in the short term, that means that acute stress response, that really quick, like, whoa, panicky response, is using different stress hormones, norepinephrine and epinephrine, can actually cause you to liberate fuel. But in the long run, as we are dependent on that response to get through the day, we become resistant to it. And it actually results in us taking in more fat and getting low blood sugar. So that's one of the patterns we see. Or we can be in the other camp, relying on chronic stress responses and cortisol. And then we see the research studies, to Alyssa's point, where you can start to auto-generate fat. And I always say, isn't that so rude, right? That you can literally take your storage form of glucose, glycogen, you can take your amino acids from your muscle, because cortisol can also cause breakdown, right? So you break down muscle, and then it goes through your liver and gets stored as fat. And so we are literally in a world right now where people's stress responses are so abnormal and so frequent that stress can truly be a big piece. And I always go on and I say, listen, we need to avoid the stressors we can so that your body can cope with the stressors that we can't get rid of. We can't get rid of email. We can't get rid of kids. We can't get rid of dealing with so many different aspects of life. But what we can do is not be nutrient devoid. We can not have a massive inflammatory response. We can have more balanced blood sugar. And then from there, we can handle some of that mental emotional stress without it just being this chronic issue. And so when we get to the conversation of stress, you can literally see people change, because they're like, if stress is the reason that I can't lose weight, then I'm never going to fix this. And I always say, like, there's always a path. It's just that's why we rely so heavily on data to help us understand which direction to go to be able to personalize. Because similar to everyone else who's in the stress situation, right, I also have a full life. And so if you try to target 10 things at once, you just get nowhere. And so that's why I'm such a huge proponent of, like, know your two issues that are the biggest issues and just dive in headfirst to just those things, because then everything else shakes out and it improves as we go. So yeah, such a huge topic. So then when it comes to the immune system and inflammation, because we talked about that, cortisol is hydrocortisone, right? It's anti-inflammatory in nature. But when stressed for long periods of time with gut microbiome issues and insulin resistance and everything else, we can get a really significant inflammation and immune response. So who wants to dive into how inflammation plays into weight loss resistance?
When I think about inflammation and how then, if that's present in the body, whether it's from stress, poor gut health, or insulin resistance, regardless, we now have that there. What does that impact on our cells functioning? So, when we are thinking about weight loss, or people are Googling it, and it's all about metabolic rate, right? So it's essentially, our metabolic rate is going to be the rate at which we are generating fuel for our body, essentially. So when we think about metabolic rate, it's the rate that our cells need to be running to carry out any function, whether that's burning fat or build of muscle or storing or using glucose for energy. That's essentially what it accumulates to. And we then, in the context of inflammation and thinking about metabolic rate, we're thinking about, okay, how is that impacting our metabolic rate? So essentially, it's going to make it more sluggish, right? It's not going to move through that, fat oxidation pathway as smoothly. And certainly also, just on that same vein, when we're thinking about cellular or mitochondrial health, if we don't have the right components to move through that pathway, so that would mean then we're tying it again back to gut health. Did we absorb enough nutrients to get there and use that down the pathway? Or were there any potential, toxin exposures that are then disrupting that metabolic pathway as well that we need to be thinking about? And I think I'm going a bit on a tangent here, but when we're trying to help someone achieve a caloric deficit, we are thinking about, okay, what's the metabolic rate? Because if that's how much energy you need at a baseline, then we need to go slightly lower than that, right? We have to have more energy going out than going in to achieve weight loss. But within that, it's so nuanced to how to achieve that caloric deficit, because now we're in the context of inflammation. We're like, okay, there's no calculator that's going to tell us the level of inflammation that's then slowing down that metabolic rate, or that potential low-grade toxin exposure that's going to impact metabolic rates, or if there's suboptimal nutrient like sufficiency is present, right? So all of those factors are at play when we're trying to then achieve that caloric deficit.
But I want to break that down to a different degree. So we have body impedance analysis devices, okay? And based on, so your basal metabolic rate, you can calculate based on your weight, height, muscle mass, etc., because it's essentially how much tissue do you have that is burning calories to function, your brain, your muscles, etc., versus how much is sitting on your body and needing to be carried around. So fat mass needs to be carried around, but it doesn't need a lot of energy. It's a storage location. So if we look and we say, okay, someone's basal metabolic rate, how much energy they need to exist, right? For digestion to happen, to be able to breathe, to be able for their brain to work at rest. If we see that is 1,600 calories, that means when you're walking around throughout the course of the day, that means when you're exercising, that's all in excess. So in theory, what that means is that person should be able to eat 2,000 calories and still lose weight. Because that's why we have all these beautiful rings and all these things. And it'll say like, oh, you burned an extra 1,000 activity like calories today. So that would mean if my body was in the perfect form, which God knows she's not, right? But if it's in the perfect form, then I would take my basal metabolic rate from that calculator online or the machine, and then I would add 1,000 to it. And that's how much I would need to eat to maintain my weight. And when I go through that with my patients, they get hella pissed because they're like, if I could eat 2,500 calories and maintain my weight, that would be like a blessing. But I can't even eat 1,400 calories, otherwise I gain weight. So that's what Dr. Sam's talking about, is like we have our potential, right? We have the potential of our body and how much it should be burning. And then you add hormone signaling issues with insulin. Then you add inflammation, which is static in the signals, the corrosion of the battery, they're rusting, right? Then you add nutrient deficiencies. You don't actually have what you need to make that cycle turn. Then you add your stress response. And all of a sudden, you're in this place where your muscles, your tissue, your body is not functioning to an ideal level. So you have to eat less and less before it goes into your fat pads. And people feel this. I say this all the time. I'm like, do you feel like you have the energy of a 5-year-old? No. Right? And so people come in, they're tired, they're achy. They don't feel like themselves. They feel like they're aging rapidly. Like it's a very rare day that someone comes in and says, I'm eating as well as I think I should be. You know what I mean? There's a life and lifestyle for a reason. I'm eating reasonably well. I know that I eat 1,600 calories-ish or less, but I also have these 10 other symptoms. My gut's a mess. This is a mess. This is a mess. And so we talk a lot about treating weight loss resistance, but fundamentally, we're never treating the weight. Right? It's not like, okay, you want to lose this many pounds by this date. And so let's calculate your deficit and how many pounds you would have to lose and blah, blah. It's bullshit, right? We look at it and we say, what are the variables that are proverbially turning down the heat on your system, meaning you're not burning that caloric load? And I think it is such an important conversation because it can feel so overwhelming, especially when you go into like a bro medicine environment. No offense, kind of. Mm-hmm. And there's this conversation about like, well, here's what the machine says your basal metabolic rate is. And so this is how we're going to calculate everything. And then it doesn't work because hormones dictate how much energy you burn, whether that's thyroid hormone or insulin or the hormones, cortisol, our inflammatory response. This is all a signaling system that, to your point, is all stacked on top of each other. So we have potential and then we have reality. And it's so important to understand the difference between those types of things. Just like you can have someone who's the most brilliant person in the entire world. They can't find the money to go to school. They don't have the tools and equipment they need to practice. Like there's someone with huge amounts of potential, but they can't execute it. We've all seen those people in our lives. And you're like, okay, well, that is very similar to our body. So instead, just like we would do in that situation, if it was another person, how can I resource you? How can I support you? What can we do to help you get to your full potential? We have to think like that with our body as well. How can I eliminate a burden? How can I reduce a stressor? How can I change your inflammation? How can I work on your gut? How can I support your liver to then be able to allow you to fundamentally access your full potential? So I just wanted to expand on that in a slightly different way because it's such an important concept that I don't think we talk about very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's just kind of exactly the beauty of our type of medicine where everyone's getting that individualized treatment where we're investigating, okay, this is where that signaling pathway is going awry, and we're going to work on correcting it, the 2 or 3 most predominant pathways for that individual, and then helping them, demystify or realize that, it doesn't have to be an ultra low calorie diet or this calculator that tells you, oh, now you're in fat loss mode. Probably not.
I wish it was. That would just be a gift.
Yeah, if there's anything else going on, right?
So one of the other questions that comes up a lot is how thyroid relates to weight. So we just talked about it a little bit, but one of the things that's really important to understand is that your thyroid is just one of the levers on how much energy your body feels like it has to burn and exert. It is just one of the ways we get gas in our gas tank to burn and run through. And so when we're looking at thyroid function, if someone's thyroid is not, so their thyroid is the gland in the front of your neck, right? But if you do not have enough thyroid hormone, or that thyroid hormone is not active at the time and place we need it to be, then what we see is people can present with brain fog and fatigue, with constipation. They can present with weight gain, a lot of symptoms that are very similar to the general weight loss resistance presentation. So one of the things we always do is test thyroid function. How is your brain talking to your thyroid? So that's going to be your TSH. And then we look and we say, how much are we seeing your T3, right, which is your active hormone, come from your T4, which is your storage hormone. So again, the fundamentals, we keep coming back to hormones and hormonal health. But if we see that there is not a situation where we have enough hormone at the right time, then that can be worsening your metabolic control. That can be worsening the amount of the calories you burn at baseline, quote unquote. But it also can dramatically impact your inflammation in your gut and everything else. So testing and understanding thyroid function is one of the pieces, but we get that question a lot. And then we do testing and there's really not huge deficits in the area of hormonal or like the thyroid hormone disruption. And so we need to look at the fact that your thyroid's just a canary in the coal mine. And so what's happening is your body is down regulating to protect itself, which I would say is one of the biggest things we see with weight loss resistance, this general state of lower energy use, this general state of dysfunction. And so I wanted to put that in there because we always get asked that question about like, how is the thyroid involved in this? And I have a thyroid disorder. Like, look at all my symptoms. I went on the calculator, I went online, I checked all the thyroid boxes. And I always say yes, but that can look like a lot of different things because that is weight loss resistance, is the general decrease in hormones overall and the general decrease in the rate at which our metabolism works overall. So yeah. On that note, any last minute thoughts, any last minute things we want to get into when it comes to weight loss resistance?
I think maybe the only thing we didn't touch on, and we probably do not have time to fully expand on it, is the impact that our sex hormones can have on weight loss, and specifically speaking to, kind of the perimenopause, menopause population. That probably should be a part 2, but it is a huge player and also something I'm very passionate about. So maybe we need to turn this into a part 2.
Absolutely. And we can, let's dive into that and how that impacts insulin and everything else, because you're right. It is a huge conversation and it's one that we're having a lot more. We're getting a lot more questions about, but we see completely different shifts in all those aspects, shifts in insulin, shifts in muscle, all of those types of things. So yeah, I love that idea. We will split that out into a part 2. As someone who's experienced weight loss resistance, it is so overwhelming, right? It is something so visual that people see and they make initial snap judgments about who you are and how you operate based on that number. And we don't do that here, right? Like, we deal with this all day long. We're not going to have someone come in and automatically be like, well, what are you eating? Because you definitely ate your way into this, right? And I was talking to a patient yesterday and I must have said this 10 times. Listen, you didn't eat your way into this. You're not going to eat your way out of it. She has thyroid issues. She has gut issues. She has incredible stress responses. She had autoimmune conditions, all of these things. And I was like, okay, let's just look at your weight as a reflection of your overall health. And you can find doctors who are willing to do that. And I know sometimes it sounds too good to be true, but you can move through the other side when you have this data, which is why we talk about it so much. So thank you, ladies, for coming on. Always so much fun chatting. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And we will be back for part 2. So we will talk to you then.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message. And that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.